Доброго дня. Доброго дня. Алло, доброго дня.
Good afternoon.
Доброго дня, колеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Ми почнемо десь за 3 хвилинки.
It seems to me that everyone is ready. So, Mr. Shevchenko, the floor is yours.
Ну що ж, наче всі готові. Тож, пане Шевченковський, вам слово. Я віце-ректор Українського католицького університету, і дозвольте мені представити наших шановних учасників панелі. Маємо Еміне Чапарова, це заступниця міністра закордонних справ України. Також маємо Тамілу Ташеву, це постійний представник президента України в АРК Крим. Вітаємо. Маємо також Ольгу Скрипник, це експертка з Кримської платформи і Євгеній Ярошенко, це організація Crimea SOS. І також прошу привітати Людмилу Білоус з
КНУ імені
Шевченка. Ну і зараз одразу, не гаючи часу, хотів би передати слово пані Еміні Джапарові для того, щоб сказати кілька
Thank you,
слів.
Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Дякую, модератори.
Thank you, discussion.
Дякую, Дмитро. Я
Great.
рада долучитися до обговорення. Вітаю
З Києва.
І я хочу на початку сказати, що весь мій день я присвячую питанням Криму. Вранці ми говоримо на комітеті ВРУ про права людини. Говоримо з представництвами різних неурядових організацій, інших організацій, які доповідають про реалізацію основного документу. Це стратегія деокупації та реінтеграції Криму. Тож я рада продовжити свій кримський день, і я сподіваюся, це вже буде останній мій захід на четвер, але я не буду занурюватися у деталі, у ці дуже детальні аспекти, тому що я знаю, що наші експерти з прав людини може більше сказати по статистиці, по числам, по тенденціям. Натомість я хотіла б поговорити про найбільш важливу річ пропаганди, той наратив, який продавався росіянам у всьому світу. Я думаю, що важливо зрозуміти історичний контекст півострову, щоб зрозуміти, що ж там відбувається зараз, і хто такі кримсько-татарські представники населення. І я трошки хотіла б проговорити про нашу історію, тому що вона не настільки відома всім. І це найкращий спосіб зрозуміти підходи до російської пропаганди. І отут можна зупинитись на тому, що є дуже особистим для мене. Це ініціатива Кримська Платформа. Я вважаю, що це той проект, який повернув Крим на порядок денний міжнародної спільноти. І ті два надзвичайно ефективних саміти цього року і попереднього року – це такі дуже важливі моменти. Тож історичний контекст, ви знаєте, що основний наратив полягає в тому, що Росія просуває, наче що Крим як традиційна територія, яка належала до Росії, до християнства. Але якщо відкрити будь-яку російську книгу про якусь історичну книгу, ви бачите там грецький період, це стародавні часи, а потім Російська імперія. І все. Проміж цими періодами там нічого не було. Тоді як? Там існував незалежне кримсько-татарське кримська держава. І, власне, коли Катерина II захопила Крим, вона, по суті, зробила все можливе для того, щоб зникнути, щоб прибрати всі ці кримсько-татарські аспекти культури, щоб ці всі містечка були перейменовані, щоб ті мечеті були знищені, щоб, власне, знищити всі ті ознаки, всі ті докази існування кримсько-татарської культури. І тоді чимала частина, власне, населення була вимушена поїхати до Туреччини, до інших країн. Саме тому зараз десь приблизно 2 мільйони кримсько-татарців зараз знаходиться в Туреччині. І другий такий величезний шматок історії – це депортація мого народу в 44-му році. Власне, взагалі існування кримсько-татарського бойкотували той референдум, який від
there is an act of revenge towards Crimean Tatars because the majority of the political prisoners that we have are the Crimean Tatars. But of course, the reality, I believe, if very briefly and shortly, Crimea is a military base today, and there is no any illusion that it's a touristic pearl and a showcase for Russia. Of course, it's a showcase for Putin's personal project with this Crimean bridge, with billions of investments into the propaganda, into the military units that they have been actively reconstructing. But in fact, they've been using Crimea as a military base for their next aggressive steps. And to conclude this first part of my speech, I think that it's crucial to have the lesson learned. I call it the Crimean lesson learned, because I'm sure, and this is what we vocal to the international community very clearly, saying that the result of our inability to give proper response to the attempted annexation of 2014 is we have and see today as the full-fledged invasion and aggression in my country. So this war that we are now bravely fighting against Russia, and I believe on behalf of the whole world and on behalf of the whole civilized world, is a direct consequence of 2014 smooth occupation for Russia, because impunity always has a consequence, and if aggression is not stopped, it becomes bigger. So this is what we have so far in Ukraine. So our next message and our kind of next notion is that if the war is not stopped in Ukraine, it will become bigger, because this aggression of Putin, if it's not stopped, I believe that there is a great danger of bigger scenario and of bigger war. So going back to what we did as a state, as a society, as people of Ukraine, the Crimea Platform initiative that started 2 years ago, and it started with a scratch of paper when it used to be a concept, and now it's a project. It's a great project that has been supported almost by 1/3 of the whole world. When the second summit consolidated around our national interest, which is the occupation, over like 60 countries and international organizations. But before, let me tell you a bit more, what kind of project is this? So initially we were thinking as far as we had political and diplomatic fight towards Crimea, and it was fixed in all of the fundamental documents of my country. So we launched this coordination international platform as a diplomatic effort, as an initiative of Ukraine, while having countries joining the Crimea Platform, joining the idea that Crimea is Ukraine and that we have to fight for it. We have to fight for justice, and we have to get Crimea back without any trade and bargaining. The architecture of the Crimea Platform is multidimensional. It has let's say the core, the governmental level or the leadership level, and the Inaugural Summit we had a year ago, 23rd of August 2021, when 47 states and leaders physically visited Ukraine, Kyiv, and I believe it's unprecedented unprecedented coordination platform that we never had as a country and the world never had about any kind of occupied territory. So we had a declaration when countries committed themselves and itself into the fight for the territorial integrity of Ukraine. The second summit that we had this year, it was online because of the war. It actually surpassed our expectations. 60 countries, 37 leaders have been joining online the platform. The ministers, the presidents, prime ministers, ministers of foreign affairs, defense ministers, and other high representatives of the governments have been representing their countries, respective countries, actually quite clearly saying that Russia discredited itself as a reliable partner, and that there cannot be any negotiation over Crimea, and that Crimea is Ukraine and will be returned to Crimea. So we have really powerful speeches of leaders, and I think that it's also a very clear signal to Russia and our people, our citizens who live in Crimea. Then the other dimensions that we started 2 years ago are now starting to live their own life, because Crimea Platform is a kind of a political umbrella. It has national dimension and international dimension. And when it comes to the international, the parliament track is also important. We've been thinking that parliaments are usually much more flexible than let's say, governments, and in order to push the countries and the governments to join the Crimea Platform, in order to push the real reality and the, let's say, our vision, Ukrainian vision towards Crimea, the parliament track has been launched. So we will have this summit, which will be physical in Zagreb this year, 25th of October, which is the Croatian capital. I'm very happy that Croatia accepted our initiative, and Croatia was chosen as a country because they also survived Srpska Krajina and the occupation by Slobodan Milošević. Well, I believe in a way the same situation, and these people not only know but also feel the sentiments of my people. And I think, and as they said and as they messaged, they're very much proud of having and hosting this summit. So I believe that it's going to be a very efficient one. The other event that we are now developing is the Crimea Platform Black Sea Security Conference, which will also take place not in Kyiv, again for security reasons. I probably will not tell you in advance where exactly, but it's a Black Sea European country. So we're now consulting our neighboring country for hosting this conference. This is a joint project of the expert network and the MFA and the Defense Ministry. So as far as we also launched and initiated, let's say, pushed for the launching of the expert network of the Crimea Platform and the security track of this, and the expert network has 7, let's say, groups, working groups, and one of the most efficient and one of the most powerful is the security track. So I believe that the Crimea Black Sea Security Conference will be yet another deliverable. And the idea is very simple, is actually to come up with a strategy, because what we have been seeing since 2017, when Russia, under different pretexts, have been stopping the trade vessels of international vessels coming out from Ukrainian ports in Mariupol, in Berdyansk, from Odessa, and, you know, holding them for days and actually ruining our economy and our traditional trade routes. I believe this was the first reason. And the second, the food insecurity issue, something that we will see with the grain export. Is it another attempt to clearly say that there is a need to understand what are the security challenges in the Black Sea region, in the Azov Sea, that has in fact turned into the inner lake of Russia. So we also want to initiate the launch of the expert laboratory that will develop the strategy and then recommend to the respective governments and NATO countries that will also be invited to this conference to have a debate and to have a clear vision in their strategic documents. So to conclude myself, let me express once again gratitude for this conversation, and probably finalize my speech saying that there is a huge level of panic in Crimea, because of course every criminal, while committing the crime, knows its crime, and thus the fear is the basic feeling of any criminal. And then by creating the fear and by involving people into fear, they are trying to sublime this actually sentiment, and this panic that we see today is also a result of our, let's say, actions as a state, as an armed forces, and as a society. And then the result of it will be our victory and return of Crimea back home to Ukraine. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Glory forever. And thank you for your presentation. So we can now better understand that actually understanding of Crimea was mainly made through Russian glasses, and it was viewed and presented to the whole world. And actually that Putin and Kremlin used Crimea as a showcase, mainly showing this and proving this military idea and military agenda. And that actually the result of international society and very slow reaction towards the annexation of Crimea caused the problems in the war that we have right now. And definitely Crimea Platform as the multidimensional platform is helping a lot. So we have a number of plans and action plans that we can follow towards of bringing Crimea more closer to the world's understanding. But actually, if you may, I just want a very short question. So because in 2014, when the annexation of Crimea, temporal annexation of Crimea started, we definitely can notice that the world direction towards Crimea was was not so rich, so people don't understand like the matter, people don't understand the situation overall, and nowadays we can see more and more involvement of different countries. But nevertheless, can you say that the world and world leaders' understanding of the present challenges of Crimea are becoming much more better, and does world understand what should be done and what needs to be done in order to make Crimea be more visible on the international arena?
Well, of course, thank you, Dmitro, for your question. If we compare the, let's say, collective understanding of the situation, I mean, international understanding of the situation on the ground in Crimea, it is very different today, because when I remember I've been involved in this advocacy job for 8 years within state, let's say, agencies, not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but the other ministry. But I remember how difficult it was to actually reach out hearts and minds of people in the international community, because really Russia for ages have been promoting its own narrative about Crimea, its own vision about Crimea, about the so-called referendum, and about justifying its own crime as they did it. And I tried to explain you through the centuries how it happened, and I think that we really had the result of it. And then we put a great effort into breaking this narrative, and I know that we are now efficient and that the whole world understands it. So of course, it's incomparably better today. The other question is that if the world understands and knows what to do, I believe that it's crucial here that Ukraine is initiating the vision, because we are the country concerned. We cannot expect others to fight for us, or we cannot expect others to decide for us what to do with Crimea. It's only our national vision. It's something that should come from within, from the society. What are we going to do to get Crimea back? I often hear one question, actually, when Crimea will be returned. So I think that this is a very wrong way to put the question. I think that the only way how we can ask, how we can consider the Crimean issue is what should we do to get Crimea back? And I think that we are, let's say, active enough to come up with our initiative, to come up with our idea. And the Crimea Platform is actually exactly what we see as the consolidation platform for the international effort to deoccupy Crimea. The conjuncture, international conjuncture, of course, has been changed since 2014. The military action that we now have throughout Ukraine, shellings, bombings, tortures, killings of civilians, destroying of infrastructure, has drastically changed the very vision of my country. So I want to make it very clear that Ukrainian people and the armed forces are, let's say, brave enough and are decisive enough to fight for every single scratch of Ukrainian land, including Crimea. So this is something that cannot be bargained and traded. And it's a very clear state position, which has been many times vocal by President Volodymyr Zelensky, by Minister Kuleba, by Prime Minister Shmyhal, and other leaders of my country.
Okay, so thank you so much for clearing up this focus. And we talked about the Crimea, and now I just want to focus more on the Kremlin, on the Crimean Tatars. So do we have a strategy how to bring them back and how to work with them after our victory and after we bring back Crimea? And I just want to give a floor here to Mila Tasheva for her presentation and probably for incorporating her vision on this question of Crimean Tatars, because we are talking about people. Yeah, that's most important.
Дякую, Дмитро.
Yes, thank you so much, dear Dmitro, and warmest greetings once again to all of the esteemed participants of this forum. This is of utmost importance for all of us to take part in this forum, both in terms of organizational support and also remembering how important it is that it's implemented as part of our World Academic Talks, which have been initiated by the Education, Sports and Youth Fund now initiated by the President of Ukraine. Definitely following up on your question, yeah, we'll be referring to the Crimean Tatars, but at the same time, from the standpoint of the broader community. So why is it important for us to contribute to this academic forum? And why, without a note of hesitation, we stood in support of this initiative roll out to the students, particularly to use that as a lens to visualize the perspective of broader Ukrainian community upon Crimea from the standpoint of the academicians, from their perspective of the decision makers who will be involved in terms of policy development and setting, not only within but outside of Ukraine as well. In very many cases, such decisions are generated and originally developed, namely at the academic level. So now we have to plunge into this academic collaboration with broad academic community, including those outside who are involved in the Ukrainian studies, including Crimea as part of it. The second element I'd like to focus on, I will try to keep that as short as possible, but speaking of the performance of the representative office of the president, particularly the Crimean Platform, which was established last year following a particular presidential decree. And we are responsible for internal policy, which means that the Ministry of International Affairs is responsible and coordinates the external track of the Crimean Platform, while ourselves, the National Representative Office of the President, are responsible for the internal policy, domestic one. And in this context, we also have certain selection of the objectives set out by the President of Ukraine. For instance, this year, together with the Kyiv School of Economics, Ministry of Infrastructure, and the Center of Defense Strategies, have developed the strategy for economic recovery of Crimea. And definitely, it covers not only economical domain, but also other important questions directly associated with the human capacity, HR, reserve and its development, as well as some of the other questions which have been raised today in discussions throughout the day and that will be addressed further on. And I'm sure we'll be coming back to that on the 29th of September. In my understanding, this was one of the particular objectives for the essay competition for the students who are contributing their submissions about the Crimean context, including such subjects and topics. And that is why the question you raised, what should be the Ukrainian government like, or what should be the Crimean setup, whether it should be an autonomous establishment or some other kind of format, everything associated with the electoral rights, attitude towards the Russians, and the course of action, respectively, following the deoccupation and recovery of full control of Ukrainian state over the Crimean Peninsula. So indeed, these are the questions are also included into the agenda of our office performance as well as Crimean Platform in the broader dimension. It also is worth mentioning that the complexity of such questions is in the fact that predefining some kind of potential reply options is not possible, which means that we, as the state, as the expert community, both speaking of Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars living in the occupied territory, we also have to contribute jointly to seek and find the answer to such questions. And also, there was a number of partner countries which were contributing some potential solutions regarding illustration, amnesty, HR aspect. They were trying and sometimes experimenting with some solutions which are not universal and commonly applicable. And thus we are borrowing some of the key features which would be fitting the Ukrainian case for the further implementation into reality. And it's also important to note that despite the fact that now we have the full-scale invasion and the greater war, we have to be frank about it, but we at the national level are talking and discussing deoccupation and identifying those first steps and mechanisms which will allow us to visualize Crimea following the occupation. They have been discussed extensively throughout the day, so I will not be spending any more time to shed light on some of the aspects, since they've been scrutinized already in our deliberations and discourse. But we have to make sure that both structure-wise and context-wise, Crimea should be fully placed into the pan-Ukrainian concept of recovery, and definitely the infrastructure should be not related to Ukrainian context only, but into the broader European context as well, in terms of such infrastructural projects, particularly in the domain of tourism development, where we can obviously see that Crimea is not as seasonal location where tourism might be high on the rise for 3 months out of the total. It should be 365, 24/7, and everything and everybody should be contributing to developing infrastructure, developing the industry, developing the personnel who would be working here. And this is exactly why we are working together with the Ministry of Infrastructure on big framework, setting both documents and networks which will enable investors to come to the peninsula after the occupation for the sake of implementing their projects. But at the same time, while we are discussing infrastructure, tourism, other industries, maritime transportation, definitely we should not forget about the safety and security, because fundamental values which are of utmost importance for our citizens, including those at the temporarily occupied territories, would be their safety. And the first thing we have to do is liberate the territory of the peninsula from the Russian occupational forces, as well as from the Russian Black Sea Fleet, I mean the Navy. And also, we have to make sure there are our securities in place, but that should be done in the form of the so-called friendly militarization to be implemented in the territory of the peninsula in order to enable and arm Ukrainians, our citizens on the one hand, and on the other hand, to avoid making this militarization excessive, just like it currently is, or being implemented by the aggressor. Obviously, our key priority is the people, Ukrainian citizens, and thus we should understand how to balance this approach in terms of attitude and treatment and action with and in regard to our citizens who survived for 18 more years in the occupation, which means that to a greater or smaller degree they have to cooperate with the local current administration, and we have to define and delineate the respective responsibility for such possibly collaboration, and that should be fully compliant to the international law. And in case there was no crime committed against humanity, no military crimes, no violations of human rights, then most probably such individuals, even having some record or background of collaborating, or rather operating as a fireguard or a school teacher teaching mathematics, for example, without any promotion of aggressive narratives of the occupational forces, then indeed such individuals should be relieved of any criminal persecution. Of course, the lustration interventions should be brought in place, and other types of responsibility and liabilities, if any. But in order to effect it, we have to start with internal communications here within ourselves, domestically, to be on the same page, and also in order to broadcast the appropriate messages to the people living in the occupied territory. We should not be claiming each and everyone as a traitor. We should not be blaming them for accepting the Russian passport. do remember that there is automatic imposure of alien citizenship, which is committed in the Crimean Peninsula, and in line with the Article 138 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, this is unlawful, and there are respective provisions, and we are deeming our citizens as victims of this violation and not the convicts, respectively. In order to maximize this support availability to our citizens, both to those in the armed forces and civilians, we have to make sure these messages are well formulated and clearly delivered. To delineate what would be the categories of Ukrainian citizens, as well as Russian Federation, by the way, will be held liable for what kind of crime or unlawful activities. Of course, there's a number of open questions regarding HR capacity. We don't have all the answers yet, but we do understand that we are talking about thousands of positions, thousands of jobs, which will have to be filled once we recover this territory, starting with the management, with the senior management tier of these structures. Definitely, some will be held liable, including criminal liabilities. Others might be undergoing some lustration procedures and thus retaining their positions. That's where and why we have a broad pool of experts, including those members of the expert network of the Crimean Platform, following the ordinance from the President of Ukraine, have established the multi-sectoral working team involving some international experts for the sake of developing such roadmap of first steps. Definitely, it will have just the rough strokes. It won't be detailed to the degree necessary at the first glance. And by the way, Madam Emina Japarova has mentioned that we have some tracks within our Crimean Platform. Government track, then the expert dimension, and the other dimension that would be the parliamentary track of the Crimean Platform performance. And this is equally important to continue our activities with the parliamentary partners and having the first parliamentarian summit of the Crimean Platform, where our expert team will be presenting at one of the topical discussions to take place on the 24th of October this year in Zagreb. And just a couple of wrap-up comments I would like to suggest, again, in response to your question, dear Dmitry, regarding the Crimean Tatars. It's important to bear in mind that last year, Office of the President was actively deliberating upon development of a draft version of the law on the indigenous people. At that time, we were still writing out the draft prior to submission to Verkhovna Rada, where by a majority of votes it was supported by the MPs and thus approved in the Verkhovna Rada deliberations. Finally, on the 20th of year of Ukrainian independence, we have officially 3 indigenous people, Krimli, Krimchaks, and Crimean Tatars, but we continue progressing in this respect. Hopefully by the end of the year, we will be able to register, maybe vote and pass in the first reading the law on the status of Crimean Tatar people, which will be of utmost importance. And further on, following our victory in this war, we will continue our discussions about the governance structure in the peninsula, at the same time producing the answer to the question, should it be an autonomy? What kind of autonomy? Should this be some kind of national and territorial autonomy? With Crimean Tatars being the indigenous people. And these are discussions which should take place, starting with the expert communities, but they also should be equally discussed with the IDPs, with Majlis, with international institutions. At the same time, appreciating that this might involve some constitutional amendments which are not possible during the martial law. And that is why we do appreciate all of the threats of making such amendments, or at least initiating them under the current circumstances. Nevertheless, we're quite mindful of delivering that ordinance from the president, so hopefully by the end of the year we will have some quite positive and promising developments in this respect. And if you have any particular comments and details, I'm happy to continue.
Presentation about the plans toward the recovery, and mentioning like the classical, I would say, the triangle of how to move there, establishing security, then working and going with the infrastructure recovery and bringing economy, bringing more prosperity to people, and later on also focus on the social rights on that. I just have one question towards your presentation that I would specifically interested to hear, and I think our participants would also like to hear. So I remember a few weeks ago we have at the Ukrainian Catholic University, we have a panel on the recovery, and it was Ali Maliyev who was present here, and he was talking about the process of decolonization that Ukraine is nowadays pushing, and he mentioned one critical thing, that definitely we need to bring Ukraine back to Crimea, but we should avoid colonization of Crimea by Ukrainians. I mean, taking the lands and the people without giving the opportunity to for the Crimean Tatars to feel insecurity and to build their own future. So, are there any plans besides the regulatory acts of how to balance, how to not colonize by Ukrainians Crimea?
Насправді дуже цікаве, Дмитро, і питання, і
Well, in fact, that is a very interesting question, and the statement that was uttered by Alim, I think it's of great interest. So what should I say about it? Yes, we do understand that there might be some issues. Therefore, in the strategic documents, there is the right of Crimean Tatars on self-determination, and respectively, the role of the Crimean Tatars and other indigenous peoples would play the crucial part in the recovery of a Crimean Peninsula. It seems to me that Crimean Tatars have a great understanding with the Ukrainian community in Crimea, and there is the mutual understanding of the role of Crimean Tatars, and we have to make for this historic injustice, as Emine has just said. Going back in time in the 18th century, when there was the first annexation of Crimea by Catherine the Great, when Crimean Khanate was destroyed, and slightly bit later, there were 95% of Crimean Tatars on the peninsula out of the overall population. After that, during 2 centuries, we have witnessed the deportation of Crimean Tatars out of the Crimean Peninsula. Therefore, this decolonization took place, and the state of Ukraine clearly understands this historic injustice that has to be rectified. Therefore, the law on the indigenous peoples has been passed. The status of the Crimean Tatars also contain lots of provisions that are aimed at protecting Crimean Tatars in the Crimean territory, not just from the point of view of the cultural heritage and language. It's also about the access to the natural resources. And yes, this process should end with the amendments being made to the constitution in the part of the autonomy of Crimea. But I do not think that there will be some backsliding with colonization of Crimea on the part of Ukrainians, on the part of Ukraine. On the other hand, taking into consideration the number of people who have moved out of the peninsula, not just Crimean Tatars, but Ukrainians who have moved out and who have been leaving the territory of peninsula not only after 2014 but also before that, the economic migrants who have left for other countries, they might be incentivized to come back to Crimea. And we could also create some incentives for people from other regions to move to Crimea. And this would help in terms of this staff reserve, the personnel that we would need. Unfortunately, Crimean Tatars are not that numerous, and especially in terms of the governance structure and governmental agencies, we would need some professionals from the mainland, maybe even international experts. We've been closely working with our partners, for instance, a Presidential Fund on Education and Innovation. Therefore, I think that it's too soon to speak about such concerns, but we should always abide by the principle nothing about Crimean Tatars without Crimean Tatars, and nothing about Crimea without the voice of the indigenous peoples of Crimea. I think that should be the transversal opinion in the Ukrainian society.
Take into consideration and to build the future of Crimea together with indigenous people of Crimea, but also to give a new blood, new push towards to make new decision making in the Crimea. And it definitely means for us that we should work a lot in terms of informational campaigns, like to work to combat Russian propaganda, and also to persuade people who probably, some of them, not all of them, but some of them could be under the Russian propaganda machine rule, that that we want to build together the better future. So I'm just referring here by these words to Olga Skripnik and asking her for her presentation. And then I would like to ask also, so do you think that nowadays we are, as a state and as a society, effective in combating this Russian propaganda in Crimea?
Дякую, пане Дмитро. Дякую організаторам за
Thank you,
цей
Dmitro. I would like to thank organizers for this important forum, and I would like to thank you for holding this forum at such a high academic level. And I should say that we need to support the initiatives of the students. And in Yalta, at the end of 2013, students have become this driving force of support for Maidan. Therefore, I am very happy about this initiative, and I'm glad to be part of this forum. In the context of the topic for discussion in our panel, I would like to focus on the informational warfare that is waged by the Russian Federation, and this is an integral part of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. I believe that this topic is of huge importance, speaking about the challenges that we had to address, since we know that there are Ukrainian citizens who have been subjected to the influence of the Russian propaganda for 9 years in a row now. The Russian propaganda kills, literally. And it is very important to understand, not just for Ukraine, but also for other countries, as this risk pertains not only to Ukraine. This is a challenge to be tackled by the whole civilized world. We, as the human rights group, we've been working since 2014. We originate from Crimea, and our activities are not public. We are running our operations low-key in Crimea, but we are collecting evidence, and we have the permanent monitoring group. So today I would like to focus on the fact that, except for apart from mass violations of the human rights in Crimea, there are some huge consequences of the Russian propaganda, mostly and it pertains to the hate speech and propaganda, and they have crossed all the lines. And as the human rights advocates, we may say that now there are some calls to genocide. How was it done? At the beginning, this was the physical destruction of journalists, of human rights activists, persecution of human rights activists. As a result, we have at least 140 political prisoners who have not committed a single crime. They have they have been trying just to tell the truth. Yesterday, we have heard the conviction for Narimov Jalayev, and he had been calling things by their names. He supported Crimean Platform publicly, and he was calling occupation an occupation. So he was convicted to a sentence in prison. Russia keeps on persecuting journalists, even those who have become citizen journalists, who are not working for media outlets. Among them, it's the case of Irina Danilova, who has been abducted by Federal Security Service of Russia this spring, and she's in prison now. And also education, the educational issue. Education is used as the tool of militarization. Russia is creating such conditions that the Ukraine that these children do not see any other way to proceed with their future except for becoming part of the Russian army. And Ukraine has filed a claim to the ICC with regard to this. And another issue is the hate speech that is so widespread and so widely used. In 2014, already we have seen the hate speech in Crimean newspapers and media outlets, and we have seen that the hate speech is actively used against Ukrainians, against Crimean Tatars, against the LGBT representatives and journalists. And even back then in 2014, we have seen the calls on exterminating these groups. Russia has occupied the media environment as well. Ukrainian websites have been blocked in the territory of Ukraine. Besides, the radio channels, radio stations have also been replaced by the Russian radio stations. And we have found out that at least 34 frequencies were blocked by the Russian Federation, and the Russian Federation was using these frequencies for their radio stations. And this happened in Kherson region, and we see the result of it. And they have started this kind of operation in 2021 already, and this year we see the outcome. It means that back in 2021, Russia has been preparing for these military operations. For the past 8 years, the Russian Federation has been trying to change the mindset, to shape the image of an enemy being Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, so on and so forth. So could you imagine also the call to action added to it? And the call to action would be the call to extermination of these groups. And we have seen the results of such an attitude: Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, Izum. And we see that there was no justified ground to torture the civilians. There was no justification for that. They were doing it on their own initiative, and Russia has been preparing them to do that. We are now preparing the brief to be disseminated among the participants and all stakeholders. Russians were using not just the hate speech, but also some complicated phrases that were mm, aimed at changing the consciousness of people. And we were talking about the demographical issues as well. When Russia is physically trying to replace Ukrainians with Russians. But let's add another factor to that. Russia is trying to change the consciousness, the mindset of people. And this is something that we would have to counter. How can we do that? We need to carry out the evaluation from the legal point of view, from political point of view, and from societal point of view. We need to investigate this calls to genocide, and we also have to explain to our partners that those who disseminate propaganda are also criminals. They have to be brought to accountability. Therefore, we are calling on investigating into such cases, and there is the type of crimes that is called calls to genocide, inciting genocide. And another challenge that should be viewed not just from the point of view of a humanitarian dimension, but also security dimension, because there is a threat to other countries as well, especially now when many people are seizing this opportunity of what has happened in Ukraine to move to European countries or to Canada or to the US. We are calling them journalists, but among those people, there are people who have been working for Russian media outlets for at least 8 years, and they are the people who have been disseminating the Russian propaganda. Not only we need this information, our international partners also need this information. They have to be careful. So we urge on our partners to pay attention to who is moving to another country. For instance, those who are called journalists, but the activities do not comply with the journalism standards since they were disseminating propaganda. I would like to underscore the fact that the outcome of Crimean annexation is the gross violation of human rights. Therefore, we need to protect Ukrainians and the residents of Crimea, and we have to do that. We have to protect our people by military ways as well.
Because indeed, what we witness, what we see is changing people mentality, making them like a part of the so-called Russian world. And what I want to admit, like the proposal that all these Russian talking heads and propagandists, we should consider them to be a criminal. So I think that here we should build a lot of ways how to treat that. That is pretty unusual. But nevertheless, with the occupation, nevertheless, we still will witness people who are under the propaganda attack. And what could we do with them? Let's imagine, so Ukraine take control. So what we do with them? Should we reteach them? Should we exclude them? So what are the main proposals? So the first steps that we should move?
Так, дійсно, це складне питання. І
Oh, yes, indeed. That's a difficult question. And Mr. Milatasheva mentioned that there is the intergovernmental group that is working on the next steps after the occupation. First and foremost, we have to resume Ukrainian broadcasting and the operation of Ukrainian media outlets in Crimea. But that is just part of the equation. Besides, we need to talk to people, and the activities have to be carried out by many ministries, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Culture, and also other ministries. What do we do with people who have been drafted to the Russian army, who have been forced to join the Russian armed forces? We have to solve all these issues. Tamila also mentioned the fact that it is important for people to understand who was collaborating with Russian occupiers and who were were not collaborating. And now Russia is also telling the scary stories of horrible Ukrainians who will come to this land one day, and we will have to ease these concerns as well. This would require a number of measures to be taken, and among those measures, the critical thinking and critical review of the information should be. We also will have to work on the education, not just
І це займе час.
language or Ukrainian literature, but also the mindset. And we have to give the responses to the issues of concern for the Crimean Tatars. We have heard quite a few of them today. So a lot of things that depend on Ukraine already now, long before Ukrainian armed forces would go back to Crimea.
Steps that we need to use. And I just want to jump to the ecological dimension. There is a topic that we have, and we also have the tremendous challenges in that way. So I just want to give the floor to Evgeny Yeroshenko, probably to stress in what we have right now in terms of ecology and what challenges we see right now.
Thank you, Dmitro. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with so distinguished speakers and participants. When we talk about Crimea, we do not frequently mention environment, though environmental situation has far-reaching implications for health, well-being, and human rights of Ukrainian citizens in occupied Crimea, as well as it has environmental effect on mainland Ukraine and the whole Black Sea region. Before 2014, Crimea had been widely associated with unique nature. Between 2014 and 2022, Crimea had been widely associated with political repressions. Now, since the 24th of February, Crimea is increasingly associated with the playground for invasion of southern Ukraine and the playground for war crimes in mainland Ukraine. The damage that has been already done to the unique Crimean nature is disastrous and in most cases irreversible. Perhaps the most devastating impact on the wildlife of Crimea was caused by the unlawful construction of the Kerch Bridge and the Tavrida Highway. The traffic on the bridge pollutes the sea, and the bridge itself threatens to destroy the fragile ecological balance of the Sea of Azov. The bridge also causes irreversible changes in hydrogeological processes in terms of water level fluctuations, patterns of flows, and water salinity levels. The unique flora and fauna of the Sea of Azov are also hypersensitive to the slightest changes in the environment. In addition, Russia regularly conducts military exercises in protected natural areas. Actually, Russia has turned many natural areas into sites of military exercises, which has led to the destruction of vegetation and animals. For instance, such military exercises are regularly conducted in Opuk and nature reserve area, as well as maritime zones adjacent to the Crimean Peninsula. As we know, Russia completely disregards international humanitarian law, and one of the manifestations of its disregard for international humanitarian law is the application of Russian legislation in Crimea. It's also the case for the application of Russian environmental legislations. It has led to the fact that thousands of hectares of natural territories were stripped or reduced in their protected status. after 2014, Ukraine de facto lost control over more than 30% of all of its nature reserves. Meanwhile, over 8% of the Crimean of the area of the Crimean Peninsula belong to the Nature Reserve Fund of Ukraine. That's just a few figures of how devastating impact it has on of how devastating effect was caused by the Russian occupation of the Crimean Peninsula. Yeah, in addition, many species of flora and fauna were also left without protection. According to our calculations, 13 species of flora and fauna are now in a danger of extinction. It's also partly a result of the application of Russian legislation in the on the peninsula. Meanwhile, Crimea is the habitat of around 37% of plants and nearly 58% of animals, which are included in the Ukrainian endangered species. And since 2014, almost half of them are found only in Crimea. We also should emphasize large-scale construction projects and fencing, especially in the coastal areas. Such activities result in the destruction of natural habitats and interrupt migration processes, which lead to which has a negative effect on well-being of local species, especially on the seashore. Economic activities have also a disastrous effect on local environment. The accident that happened on the factory Krymsky Titan, Crimean titanium, in 2018 became the largest industrial disaster in Crimea during the years of occupation. It came as a result of the careless attitude of factory management towards the pond that stores acid, while this pond requires a constant water supply. Another problem is connected with waste management, waste recycling. The problem of recycling solid household wastes appeared in Crimea long before 2014. However, it has significantly worsened during the years of occupation. One of the reasons for that is the absence of the system of recycling, increase of the number of illegal waste deposits, as well as a rapid increase of the population of Crimea due to mass resettlement of Russian residents. Maritime zones are also heavily polluted. One of the reasons of maritime pollutions are military exercises with byproducts of ammunition explosions, petroleum products, and sewage runoff. When we talk about Crimea, we also cannot ignore water supply issues. As we know, before 2014, around 85% of natural water reserves of Crimea were linked with the North Crimean Canal. But after the occupation, Ukraine stopped water supplies to Crimea, and it has led as a result, Russian authorities started using propaganda that Ukraine conducts so-called water blockade or even water genocide of the Crimeans. However, this is caused not so much by the fact that the water flow was stopped, but by the fact how the occupying authorities are treating water resources in the peninsula. The occupying authorities tried to find alternative water supply sources. However, all of them are not effective and bring much more disastrous and they have much more disastrous implications. For instance, they try to drill additional boreholes in steppe areas. They try to distill seawater and change the routes of rivers. As for instance, the change in the direction of mountain streams creates risks for many freshwater fishes. That's just that's far from incomplete list of environmental issues which the Crimean Peninsula is facing today. Crimea SOS last year presented a large research which provides analysis of 2 dozens of environmental issues which which are visible, but the longer occupation continues, the more and more environmental problems are likely to be revealed in the future. What could we do in this regard? First, both the Ukrainian government and environmental groups should document all cases of environmental damages. It is necessary to maintain a register of environmental damages which are done to Ukrainian citizens in Crimea, and legal entities. It is also desirable to involve international organizations such as the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, to help the Ukrainian authorities to make an assessment of the ecological situation in Crimea, including by means of remote monitoring. It's pretty hard to assess ecological damage given the fact that Ukraine temporarily lost control over the peninsula. And it's even much more complicated to assess indirect impact of environmental damages in terms of damages done to local residents and other persons and legal entities. What also is advisable to do is that it's necessary to provide the UNESCO World Heritage Committee with a list of natural sites in Crimea that could be included in either in the list of World Heritage or in the list of World Heritage in danger. And finally, it's also worth considering imposing sanctions against individuals and legal entities involved in looting and illegal export of natural resources from Crimea, vessels and shipping companies which are involved in illegal export of natural resources from Crimea to third countries, construction companies that are involved in construction projects in protected areas and in the whole peninsula in general. So environment is a complex issue which requires permanent attention from various stakeholders, not only from the government, but from the civil society, from environmental groups, from the international audience. And environmental problems have far-reaching implications for other spheres of life, be it human rights, well-being, or health. Therefore, addressing environmental situation in Crimea is vital to resolve other issues caused by Russia's occupation of the peninsula. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Yevgeny, for introduction. And I think I opened a lot for myself, and I think that we now understand what are the challenges we face. But I just want to give floor to Lyudmila Belarus for her presentation, and probably you will build on some of the theses that were already done. But nevertheless, I understand definitely that it takes to probably, let's hope it will be fast, but it could take long before we get Crimea, and that's mean that we'll have more and more damages. But what we can do right now? So, or should we just wait? So please, Lyudmila Belarus, the floor is yours.
Всіх вітаю на цьому форумі. Приємно.
Greetings, everyone. It's great to join the academia. I'm the professor of the university at the Department and Environment of our university. And at our university, we're dealing with environmental protection, and this terrible situation with the environment in Crimea is terrible. And the previous speaker, Yevgeny, has mentioned a lot of the issues. Now, the major list of these challenges is provided on the second slide. So here's the list. And Yevgeny definitely mentioned all of them. I would like to focus on the first one, which is the ecosystem. It's a very precious for Ukraine. I'm talking about the nature and the nature of Crimea, because Ukraine has 3 regions which are identified by the Natural Reserve Fund, which are priority for preserving the nature and biodiversity. This is the Carpathian regions, the Delta of Danube, and the Crimean forestry complex. Now, the situation with the nature over the period of occupation and the destruction of the nature and that unique settlements and in some of the regions where the endemic representatives of the flora and fauna species were located. So the next slide contains the photos of the Crimea. These are space photos that were processed specifically for analyzing the situation with the vegetation cover of Crimea. And here, as you can see, the vegetation cover as of 2016, and we have the dynamics for 2 years. Now, the loss of this vegetation cover as per the NDVI index for 2016-2018, this is something we can see on these photos. It allows us to preclude that this unique steppe plants has been almost destroyed, and I don't know what the reason for that. They're not providing any agricultural products without a proper irrigation, but the steppe vegetation has been destroyed by 70% over those past 2 years. Now, that's a terrible situation, and restoring that ecosystems is extremely difficult, if not impossible. And it's hard for me to imagine what's the story if compared with what's the actual story compared with 2016, but this Crimean sub-Mediterranean complex, and particularly the mountain systems and the forest systems there, being significantly converted and destroyed. And the next slide, that it shows how it's all being destroyed and how it looks like. That's the natural reserve, and you can see a tractor over there with a lot of grass being excavated and wood cutting, massive wood cutting in Nalushta. They've cut the unique endemic plants, and this is something that is happening on a massive scale. Then a lot of pines have been cut, and there's a significant issue with the deforestation. Now, the next slide. Here is the map, and it catches the situation with the natural reserve within the Crimean sub-Mediterranean complex. And Ukraine has to protect it, has to preserve it for the Natural Wildlife Fund. Now, that national reserve under Ukraine, it was absolutely prohibited to do anything. But when Russia occupied that, it turned it into a national park. And that is why there's a lot of recreation, a lot of constructions. Now it's a national park and not a national reserve. That's something absolutely different. And that territory was recognized by the international organizations as such that requires protection. So Ukraine has no access to this territory, but still the international organizations have to interfere, and Ukraine has to talk about this, has to engage international organizations to this situation, dealing with the loss of biodiversity. Now, the previous speaker also mentioned about the natural reserve in Opuk, and we have a space map in the lower left corner. Now, instead of this Opuk Natural Reserve, basically on the territory of that, they have a natural military exercise ground, and they're testing their weapons inside there. And those red dots, these are the fires, the active fires that took place last year, in fact. And this is absolutely not a natural reserve, but a military exercise area. So using natural reserves that were protected by Ukraine and secured for Ukraine for many years, Ukraine trying to make them part of the international system of natural reserves so as to comply with the commitments taken. Now it's all being violated, and surely Ukraine cannot interfere with that until it will deoccupy and liberate all of its territories and take back the control over this unique natural resources. It's all about this biodiversity, so that it would regain control and preservation of that.
Let's go into the next slide. This is also one of the illustrations to what has been discussed earlier, and particularly a result of building the Crimean Bridge. Here we have satellite imaging, and thus you can see the shallow waters visible from the space, particularly surrounding the bases of this bridge, which is resulting on the dirt accumulation and making a devastating effect on the hydrological array of the sea, affecting both the habitat as well as bottom landscaping as the result of sludge production. If you look at the top, this would be one of the images made about the changes resulting from construction of this bridge, as describing the natural cyanosis resulting in devastation of the original island, which used to be located, and converted into one of the supports for the bridge. And now, just to describe some of the actions done on Ukraine and building up our preparedness to take an active part in the recovery of the nature of the Crimean Peninsula. And that would be first and foremost active performance by the Ukrainian Nature Saving Group, aligned in its activities with the respective ministry, getting prepared to recultivation of the ecological network. The Emerald Network would be the name for it, following the initiative suggested by our environmentalists to be deployed once Crimea is liberated. Also, here we can see some of the key facts with the Global 200 ecosystem, which is the World Wildlife Fund within our Crimean sub-Mediterranean array, and also reflecting the effects of construction, development, and cultivation of the natural reserves. Yes, we are working in this respect, but informational efforts are not sufficient. We have to make sure there are substantial efforts made in order to recover the territory and the beauty of Crimea.
When we can talk that some of the consequences of Russian occupation can be postponed, so we can work with that. So in terms of ecology, it's absolute disaster, and we need to yell to the whole world how to do this. So the organizers just telling me that we're coming to the end. So I just want to thank all my esteemed colleagues for providing their thoughts and stressing of the really important points. Thank you for that. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your involvement and moving very clear steps how we can plan and build better Crimean future, better Crimean Ukrainian future. So, and kudos to organizers for raising up this question. And I just want to thank everybody here and to give a floor to Eric Kucherenko. So, thank you.
Dear Dmitro, dear participants, again, many thanks for your participation. And now, if you allow, I would like to, as organizers, pronounce a few concluding remarks for the first part of our forum, which basically featured 4 panel discussions. So my name is Eric. I'm an international law student of Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, and I'm happy to be a co-organizer of this wonderful forum. You see, I am very much interested in the way public policy is shaped. And as you have probably been able to observe, all topics of our panel discussions, as well as our student essay competition, were and are dedicated to complex public policy issues. And it was really interesting for us to discuss some pressing issues related to the reintegration of Crimea and explore various solutions we can come up with. It was indeed a significant organizational effort of our team, and we are grateful to the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine to the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, her team, to the support service of the Crimea Platform, and to our home university for your kind assistance at all stages of the organization and preparation of this forum. I would say that we can be satisfied with the results because it was important for us to have some clear deliverables after the forum. And we have had profound discussions today on legal, economic, cultural, and so-called crisis management aspects of the deoccupation of Crimea. We took notes during each of the discussions and enriched our perspectives with relevant comparisons, fresh views, and I believe we became a bit closer to finding right solutions, reasonable solutions to the difficult problems we discussed. We received 32 student essays contributions that impressed us and the jury by their depth and innovativeness. And my colleague Yana will tell more about the contest and its results. But more importantly, we have managed to build some lasting connections and ties with Ukrainian and foreign academic institutions, including Cambridge University, whose professor Rory Finian we had a pleasure to have with us today, including Professor Marko Sungstu from Finnish Ebo Academy with his great presentation on comparative analysis of autonomies worldwide. We also had Emily Chanel Justice from Ukrainian Center of Harvard University today listening to our cultural panel, as well as many other honorable guests, speakers, and moderators. And all of this, of course, has a clear aim: Ukrainian peaceful Crimea, where the rights of indigenous peoples are guaranteed and respected. And we want to dedicate all these efforts and this forum to everyone fighting for independent Ukraine and free Crimea, and in particular to Nariman Jalal, brothers Aziz and Asan Akhtemov, sentenced by the occupiers yesterday. And in this regard, the last sentence that I would like to say is Krim Mitlaka Serbest Olajak. Crimea will definitely be free.
Thank you, Eric, and good evening, everyone. My name is Yana, and I'm also one of the members of the organizing team of the forum. And before we proceed to the announcement of the results of the essay contest, I would like to stress the indeed unique format of today's event, as it has managed to combine both experts and student panel discussions. We have successfully conducted our call for essays, having received works from 10 Ukrainian and foreign universities. The jury panel of the contest consisted of professors from our partner universities, representatives of the support service of the Crimea Platform, and also the organizers of the forum. First of all, we would like to thank all the participants of the contest for your efforts and for your willingness to contribute to the academic research on the Crimea issues within the framework of our forum. And we were very pleased to see that most of the students has shown the profound interest in the topic and has made a truly deep analysis of the selected issue. And I will now announce the winners of the students' essay contest, who will get an opportunity to present their ideas on the 29th of September at the students' panel discussion. For the first legal panel, the jury has selected 5 winning essays, and their authors are Andreev Tit, Enhalichev Timur, Manuilova Yulia, Muronenko Bogdan, Ramazanova Shakure, and Khalilova Salime. For the second panel, 3 participants have been selected, and they are Grushenko Maxim, Tabachna Zlada, and Tumolo Antonio. The third panel discussion has received the highest amount of essays, and our jury did not manage to select only 5 best essays and decided to extend this panel to 7 participants. And they are Boluch Nikita, Danik Daria, Motrechko Lia, Pavlenko Anastasia, Filenko Valeria, Chernyak Bogdana, and Shemshur Valeria. The final 4th discussion is expected to be held with the participation of 4 students, and they are Bilik Vladislav, Orluzhitsky Jan, Godola Maxim, and Vladislav Spivak. But this is not all. There were also several essays that have received special recognition of the jury panel. These essays did not quite fit the criteria set for our contest. However, we still would like to invite the students to present their work on a separate panel outside the framework of the contest. And the authors of such essays are Bulava Anastasia, Golovata Valeria, Marushak Yana, Misutova Karina, Rusich Valeria, and Fomichenko Anastasia. Congrats to all the winners, and our team will soon contact all potential participants and provide them with all necessary details. And now I would like to give the floor to our Italian colleague, Matteo Negro, student representative for International Relations Department and representative for the Political Science Association at Louis Rome University, who has significantly contributed to the organization and to the promotion of our forum. Thank you, Matteo. The floor is yours.
Good evening, all. Thank you very much. And thank you, Eric. I wanted to deeply thank all my colleagues from Taras Shevchenko University of Kyiv, the organization committee, and all the academic authorities for having the opportunity to speak at the end of this beautiful and so much inspiring first day of work. Since day one, as the Association of Political Science at Louis, we wanted to share, collaborate, and spread this initiative within our university. As students, we not only think about the enormous impact we can have on our local communities, students and non-students ones, but we also try to understand our role within the efforts that the entire academic community must make following the terrible events of recent months As students, and this day bears witness to this, we can be led by the work of researchers, professors, and scholars to further strengthen our understanding of events and support our research interests. But we also learn and absorb the tools that the academy offers us, which strongly recall the values that our societies and our nation defend. Just as today we have witnessed roundtables and discussion in order to reach shared conclusion, which so much recall an idea of equality, meritocracy, and democracy in research. So through the relentless pursuit for scientific truth, we can absorb the necessary means to question and defend ourselves from the false narratives and hostile propaganda. An important topic which we heard a lot during previous contribution by various speakers today. In this sense, and I want immediately to leave the floor back to my colleagues, I think that as an Italian student, together with my Ukrainian colleagues, we can effectively contribute to our societies in this historical period. Events and forums like this one can not only sustain the collective efforts and strengthen our civil societies in the face of disinformation and revisionism, which are attempting to spread in Ukraine and especially in the European Union, but also could help us stimulating a reflection on the future we want to build. Beyond that, I'm really looking forward to the second day of work, which will see us, the students, as a main protagonists, complement to the essay winners. And again, thank you to Taras Shevchenko University as a whole for the opportunity to assist, learn, and participate in this magnificent initiative. Thank you all.
Matteo, our colleague from Italy, thank you for your inspiring speech as well as your immense contribution to the conduct of the Crimea Academic Forum. By the way, hi everyone, I'm Victoria. I'm also one of the organizers of the forum. So to sum up, on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to express enormous gratitude to all the participants, partner universities, the mission of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, Office of the Crimea Platform, and the Office of the President of Ukraine, who made this forum happen in the first place. With the initiative student community of the Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, highly appreciate your support in the organization of the forum. We're convinced that such a substantial amount of work carried out will pave the way for our future cooperation. I would like to remind you that each panel discussion will result in policy papers featuring participants' insights, ideas, and conclusions. Those will contain recommendations for Ukrainian state policy on Crimea. Once again, we, as the next generation of Ukrainian policymakers, are grateful for your assistance and unflinching trust in our endeavor to organize this forum. We are full of innovative ideas and believe that Crimea Academic Forum was a significant step toward the peaceful and Ukrainian Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is the end of our forum. So again, thanks everyone and have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Recording stopped.